Okay, welcome to the Slay The Spire Ascension 0 to 25 challenge. So this will be an introduction video where I'll just explain some of the rules of this challenge, also go through the mods that I use, and also just some of the early game strategy that I use as well. So hopefully this will clear up a few questions about what the run's going to be like. So just to start with, I'll go through the mods that I use. So base mod and stslib, obviously. I've got random character button, which we won't be using for this challenge, but it just allows you to select a character at random. The Ascension Plus mod, so this is the one that will allow us to use Ascension 21 to 25. So thank Maddie for this mod. Also be using the Highlight Path mod. There are some better versions of the Highlight Path, but this is just a nice simple right click to highlight it. You can get ones that use different sorts of colours and everything, but yeah, just the simple circle's fine for what I need it for. There's also coloured map, so this one lets you configure the icons to different colours. So just set it up there. It just makes it a little bit easier to see the map visually. And also permanent Neow. So this is technically not cheating. So all this does is when you start a run, you normally have 4 options that you can choose as your starting buff. If you don't make it to the Act 1 boss, then when you start the next run, you only get 2 options. During this run, pretty much all of the time I'll still be able to make it to the Act 1 boss anyway. This mod just serves the purpose of saving that little bit of time on the off chance that I don't make it to that first Act boss. Then at least I can start the next run still having those 4 options. But it doesn't change anything else about the gameplay. So, the Ascension 21 to 25. So, normally we have all of the Ascensions up to Ascension 20. At Ascension 20 you have a double boss, so that's a double Act 3 boss. Now the Ascension 21 gives you a double Act 2 boss, so you have to fight 2 bosses, one straight after the other. Level 22 is a double Act 1 boss. Level 23 is a triple Act 3 boss. Level 24 is a triple Act 2 boss. And level 25 is a triple Act 1 boss. So when you're doing an Ascension 25 run, you have to fight all 3 Act 1 bosses, all 3 Act 2 bosses, and all 3 Act 3 bosses, plus the heart, so 10 bosses in total. In this series, we'll be doing 26 runs per character, so that's including the Ascension 0. And so across the 4 characters, you've got 104 runs in total. So this series is going to have 106 videos because there'll be this intro video, plus I'll do an outro summary video at the end as well. So in those 106 videos, in the 104 fights, we'll be doing... what does that work out to? 416 acts in total we'll be doing, because there's 4 acts per run. And it works out 125 bosses per character over the 26 runs, because Act 21 through to 25, you have 1 extra boss more. So that puts it at exactly 500 bosses across the 4 characters. So quite a bit to get through. But do a bit of an intro just to the start of the game. So normally when I start a run, it can vary slightly from character to character, but we'll go through some of the removal priority, because that's one thing that a lot of people usually query. For different characters, you do have slightly different priorities for whether you want to be removing strikes and defends. Now, obviously, depending on what cards you can get in the first couple of floors, this can drastically change the strategies of what you want to be removing. But I generally find for characters such as the Watcher, you really want to be removing defends early and going heavy on the strikes. For Ironclad as well, sort of a 50-50 with Ironclad. I tend to find between removing strikes and defends. Sometimes you do want that little bit of damage, particularly in the higher Ascension levels, where it can be more beneficial removing slightly more defends, but it really depends on what sort of attack cards you get. For the Silent, usually tend to remove strikes over defends, maybe to a 2-to-1 ratio, so 2 strikes for every 1 defend. Again, very much depends on the cards that you're picking up. And Defect, in almost all cases, tend to be prioritizing removing strikes over defends heavily. There's very few builds with Defect that can actually benefit that much from strikes, so I find getting rid of strikes for the Defect is a definite. So the first thing that I'll normally do in terms of setup for the first act is, before I even look too much at what the rewards are, I'll just have a quick glance. So we've got rare, colourless, potions, colourless card, but before I think about these options too much, I'll always have a look at the map. So this is the coloured map, by the way, with that mod. But usually what I'll tend to do is look at from the top of the map, and then work my way down as far as pathing goes and working out different strategies. So first of all, we have to consider who we're fighting in that act, and what sort of cards, what sort of builds, what sort of removal priorities are really going to be beneficial against the boss that you're fighting, and sort of take that into consideration when you're choosing your different option here. So it might be that you want to, a good example is someone like Slime Boss. In Slime Boss, you really want to be picking up some sort of AoE damage. Sometimes if you can have something like an early shop, such as these, if you do have an option that actually has things like gain 100 gold or 250 gold and a curse or things like that, having that early shop can be really beneficial. If you don't have a money reward here, then you don't really want to be hitting an early shop. Ideally, you want to be trying to hit a shop when you've got around about 250 gold, I find is a good number. That can sort of let you get, say, a card remove and a relic, or a couple of card rewards and a removal, depending on the cost of the card rewards, obviously. Relics can vary between 150 and 300 depending on their rarity, but 250's a nice number to go into a shop with, so that's sort of what you want to be aiming for in terms of shops in the pathing. So the fact that we've got no rewards here, we do have a few combats, but that shop there is one that I wouldn't go for. A shop here, if we hit 3 combats, that's where shops can be more beneficial. But usually work from the top down, so look at what your boss is, look at how you want to build your deck to be a solution to that boss. So always look at your deck building as a way of creating solutions to the problems that you're facing. So your main problems in Act 1 are going to be obviously the Act boss, so you want to be building towards having a solution for that Act boss. You've also got elites. The most valuable nodes I find are elites and rest sites. So the rest site's allowing you to upgrade, and the elites to be able to get you've got better card rewards slightly, you've got more money, you've got your relics, so the benefits of actually going for elites is nice. So if we look at pathing, what we sort of want to be doing is elites and rest sites. So these are going to be our valuable nodes. You don't want to go too aggressive on elites. So something like this, you've got 3 elites. There's lots of good rewards there. You can have a shop just before it to do a removal, but we've only got 1 rest site there. We've got the burning elite as well, so going into that is pretty much suicide. Over here, having those two elites, we do have the rest site in between, which can be good. The only real trouble with that is if we are going up this way or up this way, we're hitting 5 combats, then going into an elite. So that can be a little bit dangerous. But usually what tends to be easiest with elites is hitting an elite after you get the chest in the middle of the act. So prioritizing elites that come after that chest is definitely the preference. Any elites that you get before that chest can be quite risky. So something like this would be very risky, something like this very risky. But generally between the boss and these chests is sort of where I like to focus on. So looking at this area here, we can see we've got a rest site elite, we've got rest site elite, and we've got elite. So these two pathways are good. Having the rest site before the elite is better than having it after the elite, because that'll give you the option to either rest if you need to, or what you'll be doing most of the time is upgrading a card. So being able to get that upgrade before you fight the elite can save you a lot of health in that fight. Out of these two options that we have here, this one here to be able to hit the shop would be the slight preference. So out of these two paths, so those are our two paths, it would be this one here to hit that shop, particularly because the shop is in the later part of the act. We'll have more money saved up and we'll be able to get better use out of that shop. So at the moment, looking between the boss and these chests, it's ideal to hit this chest here. Now, if the pathing in the early part of the act doesn't allow for that, then one of these chests will be the next one we'd aim for. So if we look down slightly, we can see we've got a rest site here, so we don't want to be hitting that chest. So ideally with our pathing, it would be one of these two paths on the way down here. Now, hitting those two elites before that chest is very difficult, so I wouldn't go for that one. This one here, on the other hand, we've got the rest site before the elite, so we could get an upgrade, we could heal if we really needed to heal. That path is looking a lot better. So that node's out. So now, in the earlier part, this one we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 combats, so we've got 4 lots of card rewards. Between events and combats in the early part of the act, so there's usually lots of events and combats in the early part. It can be tempting to take a lot of events. So some of the events can be quite good. You can get things like free card removes, which can be very, very valuable early game, particularly if you can pick up a couple of good card rewards and just thin out those strikes and defends. It can be quite beneficial. The only thing with it though is if you're hitting too many events. So let's say we hit that combat there and we go all out on events here. So let's say we want to play it safe, avoid that elite, and we're just going to hit this path and just build up power through the events, try and go for card removes. The problem that we're going to have with that is you get all the way up here, you might have things like sacrifice a couple of health for a couple of gold. You might hit this shop, we've only got 120 gold, might not find anything that we need. There might be one uncommon block card, for example, that we might pick up. Or we might just go a card remove, but you're not going to get much value out of that shop with the limited money that you have. You're then going into 2 more events after that. Could be good events, could be bad events. You then have a rest site after that. Now when you get to that rest site, chances are you're not going to be healing. So if you're not healing, you're going to be upgrading a card. Now what cards are you going to be upgrading? Chances are you haven't got any from the events. It would only be a card if you picked it up from the shop. Now if you went for a card remove, chances are you might not have even picked up a card at the shop. So you're really not getting value out of the shop. You're not building your deck and you're not getting value out of the rest site. After that we come into a fight here. we have, if we go this way straight into 2 elites with a deck that's pretty much just the basic starting deck, that's just suicide. We could come up here, we could get a relic, a couple more there, so a couple of card removes. But again, we're going to be coming into late game, where at that point it's still not guaranteed that we're even going to be powerful enough to take on an elite there, never mind the act boss. So for that reason, I really like to prioritize fights in the early game. So if we take this path here, 4 card rewards, so free cards you don't have to pay from a shop. We get 1 event there. The event could be something like card remove, could be more gold. We get up to this rest site here. All of a sudden we've got 4 extra cards that we can choose to upgrade, which that is just so much more valuable. So we could go to this elite here and we would be in a much stronger position than what we would taking the other path and fighting this elite way up here near the end of the act. So really value the fights early on for that reason. Not only that, but you're also getting money from the fights. You're getting potions. So you take the other path with more events, you're not going to be getting potions for the boss either. Whereas here, you could get potentially a couple of potions. Then you've got the elite fight there. You might pick up another potion. You could use your potions against the elite fight as well. And then you're coming up to here, another card reward, you're getting the reward from there. You've then got another rest site, plenty of options for upgrades. Then after you've built up all of this money from all of the fights, you've got a shop here. You've plenty of money to spend big at the shop. You can take on another elite here, get even more power, another card upgrade, and you've got a much stronger deck going into there. So definitely prioritize those fights. So out of these 2 pathways that we were looking at, you've got, for reasons we've gone through, that shop is definitely beneficial, so I quite like that pathway. We've got a rest site just before that elite. So in total we're hitting 1, 2, ignoring those rest sites because they're guaranteed, we're getting 2 other rest sites and 2 elites, late shop. So that's the logic that I would follow for the pathing. The other thing that I do tend to value for the pathing, which isn't really demonstrated here very well, is just having options. So as an example, if we look at this path here, having the options to, if hypothetically we were to come up this way, just imagine there's more nodes below, we had a stronger deck, it might be in the second act or something like that. Having options here, so if we feel that we're strong enough to be able to take on an elite, we can take that path, or we have an option to be able to back out to rest at a rest site if we're extremely low on health. That's one thing that's not so good about this path here, is we don't really have options out, so we're forced into an elite there. When we come up here, we're forced into a shop, even though we might have had something come up where we've lost our gold, although there isn't really any events there anyway, so that's alright. But here's a good example that if we don't feel we're strong enough for that elite, then we can always opt out. So having those options can definitely persuade you to take a different path, even though it might not be the strongest path. Having those different options can be very valuable. So the only other thing that I'd work towards in terms of solutions is whenever you're building a deck, don't necessarily go for a particular archetype of deck or particular synergies and force yourself into that path. The more valuable thing that you can do is actually look at different solutions to the problems that you have. So we briefly spoke about the solutions to the boss. Also look at the solutions to the different elites that you have. So you've got the Gremlin Knob, Lagavulin, and the Sentries. So solution to the Sentries, generally you want to be going for AoE. You want to be able to generate block, so when you get to the Ascension where elites are more deadly, that shows the summary of all of the different Ascension modes. So Ascension 18, elites have more challenging move sets and abilities, so that's a big one. Ascension 8, elites are tougher, and Ascension 3, elites are deadlier. So when they're deadlier against the Sentries, they'll attack for 10 instead of 9, I believe it is standard. So having the ability to be able to block for 10 or block for 20 on every second turn. Also, you have to consider the dazes that will be added to your deck. So if you have anything that can benefit from exhaust, which Ironclad has lots of things that can benefit when a card's exhausted. Any sort of cards that have those sorts of things can be good against sentries, but AoE damage as well. So AoE is extremely valuable against sentries. If you are looking at going into 2 or 3 elite fights and you have something like Slime Boss, then definitely focus on AoE because you benefit from both the elite and the act boss. Any sort of AoE you can get. For Lagavulin, any sort of scaling that you can get that can outpace the debuffs that you receive. The different characters have different sorts of solutions. Some want to be doing as much damage as quick as possible before they get too many debuffs on them. Others can do a bit of a longer term game against it, particularly someone like Defect. I mean, the debuffs, the orbs aren't affected by debuffs, so Defect is one that can go a little bit longer against Lagavulin. But generally, if your deck is relying on lots of small amounts of damage, so if you have something like a Silent that you're going heavy into shivs right at the start, and pretty much all your damage sources are shivs, that's something that could be quite dangerous against Lagavulin. So just consider, if you are going for a lot of shivs early on, what is going to be your solution to Lagavulin when you get debuffed a couple of times. So try and also pick up cards that are going to help you in those scenarios. And Gremlin Knob's the other one. So Gremlin Knob, obviously you have to be playing a lot more attacks. For every skill that you play, you'll be gaining strength. Doesn't mean that you don't play skills. You can still play quite a lot of skills, but you just have to be more selective in which ones that you play. But it's more of a damage check than anything. So if you can do a lot of damage you don't really need to block as much. So he'll have the attack for 8. He'll have a couple of bigger attacks as well, especially after he applies vulnerable. But if you can have a source of artifact, so you pick up an early artifact potion or something like that, that can really save you a lot of health against the Gremlin Knob. But generally, a lot of times you can sort of afford to take the damage, particularly someone like Ironclad. Just take the damage to the face and just do as much damage as quickly as you can. You can get out of a fight even on Ascension 20 for paying about 30 health a lot of the time. Sort of around that 30 health mark. If you can afford to take that damage, then so a lot of the times just, take it. That could be an early solution. But if you're using a deck where you're taking a lot of skills, then again, it's a bit like having the shivs against Lagavulin. You're going to really struggle against the Knob. Trying to go for those solutions to those elite fights. And that's pretty much what you want to be doing. So instead of going for specific builds, just look at what are my solutions to the problems that I have coming up. If it's something like you have a curse in your deck, then look at, right, what's the nearest shop that I can get to so I can get rid of this curse. I very much advise not taking curses. There's very few times where a curse is actually beneficial to take. A lot of the times in events when you get offered the chance to get something for a curse, if you do have a lot of money and it's immediately before a shop, there can be times where it can be beneficial to take the reward along with the curse. Just have to have very careful consideration there, because you don't want to be going into an act boss or an elite with a curse in your deck. So if we were to go up the right hand side here, we had an event here where it's gained 175 gold for a curse. Something like that could be worth taking, particularly if we had 100 gold here as a reward. then yeah, by all means you could take the 175 gold there, plus your 100 gold you start with, plus the 100 gold bonus, take a curse, have one fight with that curse, straight into there, remove the curse, and you've got tons of money to be able to buy things at the shop, remove the curse, build up a lot of power in the cards that you're able to get from there, potentially a relic or two, and then you'll have a lot of strength going into that elite. And the last thing I'll touch on is burning elites as well. So generally, if a burning elite is near the end of the act in Act 1, it can be beneficial to go for the burning elite, particularly if you've already faced one or two bosses that were, I guess, the rock to your scissors, essentially. So the more tougher matchups, and if you've already got them out of the way in the earlier part of the act and you know that the remaining elite is going to be an easy matchup, even though it's a burning elite and that it is buffed, yeah, you can go a burning elite later on in the act. But something like this, where you've got a burning elite before that middle chest, before that relic, and not a whole lot of chance to build up power. If we did have a money reward there and that event was money, then we could probably build up a bit of power there from that, the elite, the upgrade there, going into there. But generally, I'd probably advise going against burning elites if they're before that chest. The Act 2 elites can be quite nasty, particularly as burning elites, so there's very few times that I'd go for a burning elite in Act 2, unless I'm in a very strong position. I'd usually take on a burning elite in Act 3. So, yeah, burning elite in Act 1 if it's in the later part of the act, and you know it's going to be an easy matchup. Otherwise, I'll leave the burning elite until Act 3. Red key, same thing. I'll usually leave it until the last rest site in the third act, as long as you don't forget it. Otherwise, you miss out on the heart. And the key that you get from the chest, usually leave that to Act 3 as well, but just keep in mind that you're going to miss out on one of those 3 relics. So if you do get a relic come up that's not going to be particularly useful, sometimes I'll find that I'll be taking the key in Act 1 or Act 2, but again, probably 50 to 60% of the time I'd be taking that in Act 3. That's pretty much it. That's my logic for pathing, for the things that I sort of aim for. Act 1 is the most important act in the game, without a doubt. That Act 1 is what sets up everything. So even though you might be playing the game and you might be dying a lot in Act 2 and Act 3, and you might be thinking that the power just scales up so much in Act 3 and it's so hard to catch up, or later in Act 2, or it might be the Act 2 boss. You might think that Act 2 is really brutal and you've got to improve your Act 2, but it always comes back to Act 1. Act 1 is where you set everything up. That is the most important act. And yeah, so that's pretty much all this run's going to be. Going to be going through Ascension 0 with all 4 characters first, and then work our way up to Ascension 25. Alright, see you in the next video.